Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Willow?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that doesn't come for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You forbade me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Okay, guys, welcome back to The Narrative, episode 15, Multipolar Pincer. That episode title may look familiar to some of you eagle-eyed Rumbleites. We can explain why it might look familiar in just a few minutes. Before we get into our sponsors and everything, I do want to let the cat out of the bag. The rumors are true. I was the one who cut Ab's internet. I heard that, his internet went down. He's often having internet problems. It was me. I thought the Eye of the Storm boys were getting a little big for their britches. Sometimes they go over by 30 seconds, 90 seconds. I just thought, fifth generation warfare, information warfare, asymmetry. We always got to be on our toes. Badlanders got to keep each other on their toes. It was me. And some of you may be upset about that. Maybe Abs is upset about that. power is power, as I say on this show all the time. If I have the power to cut your internet, maybe you shouldn't be streaming in the first place. So, just saying, guys, you can take it or leave it, but that's the world we're living in. That's the kind of war we're fighting over here. Before we get into this show tonight, we do have a couple of sponsors for you. One of them, speaking of asymmetric warfare, he is a man known for interrupting his own commercials to sell you other products from his company in the midst of said commercial. I don't know if this is one of those, but we're going to find out together. That's our friend at Mike Lindell, at Mike Lindell. My Pillow, which sells Mike Lindell's, I believe, is their main product of choice.
I hear every day about the products you all wish My Pillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard My Pillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use My Pillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all My Pillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard My Pillows absolutely free.
So it turns out not the best My Pillow ad we've seen. I like the one where he interrupts himself. That was just a good classic Mike Lindell selling you some good stuff. It was not My Pillow selling you Mike Lindell's at a discount. Again, we can hope. We can see if that comes later on. Our other sponsor tonight is our friends at River BTC, River Bitcoin. They have announced Bitcoin interest on cash. US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the price of groceries, mortgage, tuition on steep rises, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60. It's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is finding a way to hold on to your dollar while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to reap the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned 2 times the rate of most high-yield savings accounts, 16 times the rate of the national average savings account with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started, badlandsmedia.tv/river. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. Not financial advice, but I think the fact that we have the announcement of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and yesterday or the day before, Donald Trump referred to the United States as a future quote-unquote Bitcoin superpower. The fact that we're, $20,000 under the peak price? I don't know. I'm just saying. Stack sats. Sats are cheap right now. All right, and my guest tonight is going to be the first ever back-to-back repeat guest. The reason that the show was named Multipolar Pincer last week is because that was supposed to be what we talked about, and we were just going to do like a little intro about Canada, etc. As some of you may have noticed, last week all we talked about was Canada and the US. It was a good show. People enjoyed it, hence the fact that we're doing another one. But this week, I had renamed last week's episode to Canadian Chicanery. This week, it's titled Multipolar Pincer again, because we're actually going to do the topic that we were going to do. That's my pledge. We'll see if we stick to it. So welcoming back Matt Ehret. How you doing, Matt?
Hey there, Burning Bread. I'm good. I don't know if you put up the little disclaimer to the audience that I'm a little off in my game due to.
I did not. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't sleep well, but I'm good. I'm passionate about this topic, so of course we're gonna go there. We're gonna finally close out the topic as promised. And my ear just got hit with something weird as an earache at around like 11 p.m. and it was hellish to try to sleep. So a little bit of ocean water and some parasites. Hopefully not brain eating, and we'll see where it goes. But
you gotta get some ivermectin on you and some of that stuff.
I picked some up. It's a bit expensive, but you can't get it in Canada, right? It's actually illegal to get it in Canada. Yeah, you can't. Wow. So when I went to a local pharmacy, I picked a bunch up just because. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it ironic that probably the most powerful drugs are the best ones are the ones that we give our dogs to prevent heartworm and everything? It's pretty funny when you look at the ingredients packages on those heartworm pills. Last week we talked about Canada a lot. It was a good discussion. The reason we didn't get off that topic is because there was a lot there. There's still a lot there. But, the real reason that I wanted you on last week, I had kind of put out a tweet tonight when I announced this show. The way I had framed it was last week we talked about our fake allies, us meaning the United States. And this week we're going to talk about our fake enemies. Obviously, bit tongue-in-cheek there. I don't consider Canada or the UK enemies, quote unquote. Just like I'm not naively sitting here and saying that China and Russia are our fast friends and allies on a literal basis. But I do think that on a very macro table setter kind of term, we are seeing the beginnings from a narrative perspective of a bit of a flippening in the Western mind, those especially maybe in this audience with the ears to hear it, like with the eyes to see it. I'm not saying everybody goes as far down the rabbit hole as maybe people like you and I do, of saying what's really been going on in Russia and China, not just in recent years, but in recent centuries. What's really been going on in the West? We talked a lot about some of these Western countries that aren't quite as democratic, as you said last week, as they appear. Can we reverse engineer that? Does that maybe mean that some of these very dangerous, what we're told are foreign dictatorships, maybe were that way, but are not quite the way they're being portrayed to us? So that's what I want to get into quite a bit tonight. But as a table setter, your macro thoughts, again, it's not the opposite game, but that flippening term, do you think that we're at the beginnings of a big shift, I guess, broadly speaking, in how the Western mind sees some of these countries that we have been programmed to see as classic enemies, specifically Russia, but also places like China?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, especially in America and amongst conservatives, even in Europe and Canada, increasingly palatable to question what we have been told decade after decade throughout the Cold War about anti-Russia, especially tropes, especially considering the fact that it appears that Russia is behaving in the closest way that a Christian country should be behaving, as far as really standing up consistently to the figures like George Soros, who got kicked out of Russia, who, we have a leader there who has defended moral values, traditional values of the principle of loving your family, your nation, God, which has helped them withstand a lot of the cultural attacks into the Russian education system, to the Russian culture, and especially the political economic system, despite the fact that there were many major victories for the oligarchy in the 1990s,
right,
that saw Russia really subdued, really corrupted after the controlled demolition of the Soviet Union. What we saw was a complete creation of a new generation of sociopathic billionaire class run by Washington and the city of London. Many of whom actually got to go to jail as soon as Putin got in as the troubleshooter. What we saw was a counterattack, and Putin was organized early on by Prime Minister Primakov, one of the old guard traditionalists, but who understood the nature of the deeper historical currents at play, and was able to position Putin into a situation where he was able to replace Yeltsin. Yeah. And as soon as that happened, Putin was playing the game. The oligarchs thought he was their boy. He even made an offer to join NATO at a certain point. Mm-hmm. But what we saw
he made a couple of WEF speeches at the beginning there, and then
and everyone thought he was cool with the club, and turns out he pulled out the rug from under their feet. And those who avoided jail, as he began to renationalize, Gazprom, a lot of the privatized state companies that were privatized in the 90s, as he began to recapture control back for the welfare of the people, those oligarchs that avoided prison got safe haven in London, in the city of London that became the Moscow on the Thames. Other oligarchs were told, and he gave them a choice, saying, "Hey, you could still stay rich, but if you stay rich, you have to now play by the new rules that are going to take you away from your overlords in the city of London and Wall Street." And some did. Maybe they're still stay-behinds. Maybe they're waiting for their opportunity to sabotage. Possible. Yeah. I mean, there's still a deep state in Russia that's still there. He didn't extract all of it, but it's a fight, and they've done a better job. And as I said, China, similarly, they got annihilated in the 80s, right? They got George Soros had one of his assets, Zhao Ziyang, installed as Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party in 1987, who was there for 2 years. And that guy shared a think tank with George Soros, who, brainwashed a bunch of young talent from China in the halls of Harvard and other Western universities with Soros scholarships to send them back, kind of like the Rhodes Scholarship, right? To send them back into China as ideological Borg asset infiltrators to destroy China from within by privatization and free trade. And where Russia kicked out Soros in 2015 officially and banned all of his open society, China had already done that in 1989.
Wow. They were way ahead I didn't know it was that far back.
Yeah, most don't. It was a surprise for me too. I had to really dig into it for a book, and I was like, "Holy sh!" So that was 1989, and his asset Zhao Ziyang was stripped of all powers, was put under house arrest for 16 years, where he finally died in shame. His other collaborators who tried to carry out a Soros NED color revolution at that time, 1989, it's been labeled and in the West as the Tiananmen Square massacre, which makes it difficult because there's so much emotional charge and psyop and narrative built into.
You can go there on this show. You are allowed to question something like that on this one.
Yeah, and I think I published a thing on Badlands Media going through some of these details. Yeah. The facts are there. The whole thing was stage managed by CIA operators and Soros assets who tried to carry out a color revolution like they did with the Maidan in Ukraine in 2014, 14.
14, yep.
So China, unlike Russia, was able to keep their shit together and stay in a position where they could expel this foreign parasite to a good degree, not fully. A lot got safe haven in through the triads in Hong Kong, and there's a documentary that's been made on how the CIA and the Hong Kong triads and British intelligence worked together, because Hong Kong was still owned by the British at that time.
Yep.
And were taken out of China and given scholarships at Yale and Oxford, and they were turned into the broader global deep state that would push for regime change over the ensuing years outside of China, working later on with certain people that we know today around Miles Guo. So, and also Falun Gong, that's a big one. So all that to say, you've got this thing that I'm seeing a hunger now, at the very least, by conservatives who have grown very disenchanted by the the popular myths of our awesomeness over the recent, especially the last 4 or 5 years, and are open now to the types of revisiting of historical lessons that they were not ready for 4 or 5, even 2 years ago. They were not ready for it. And I'm seeing much more of that now. They're better on Russia, still a ways to go on the China angle, but still, I think our tendency to see ourselves as the great beacons of liberty that we were thinking of ourselves as during the Cold War, there's a lot of humble pie that's been eaten. Let's just say that. So it's become a lot more easy to look with fresh eyes at our history. So that's good.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And man, I mean, again, there's so many. Each one of these little things is its own massive rabbit hole, of course. But that's why I like trying to focus on the narrative. It's kind of a contradiction, right? You can't really focus on such big stories. But I like that you bring up something like Tiananmen Square. It's. I often say, I said this last week, whether a narrative is true or false or mostly one or the other, truly baking into your mind that whether it is true or false, what you are dealing with and what you are able to discern on an individual basis is a story you are being told is so important. And I think it's just something that most human beings don't do, right? It's so simple, but just something like Tiananmen Square. Do I know if it happened as described? No, I do not. But do I know, as you said, you used the word emotion when it came to Tiananmen Square. And a lot of what I do in my writing, I kind of tell my readers, like, what am I trying to do here? I write about all this different crap. I'm probably right about some of it, completely wrong about other stuff. The reason I try to focus on narrative is because I say what I'm trying to do, and on this show, is construct cognitive ciphers, construct frameworks through which we can examine stories that we're being told. That doesn't mean that I'm pretending we can construct a framework, and this means the next time you see a piece of propaganda, you're going to know not only that it's false, but you're going to know exactly what the truth is. That's not the claim. But something like Tiananmen Square, I think when you bring up the word emotion, it's a great signal word to say, are there patterns that we can discern in storytelling, in macro narrative, that can allow us to get closer to the truth or at least further away from the lies? And that emotion word, I think, is a really big one, right? Like, I just took Tiananmen Square as it was told at face value. Like, yep, some super brave Chinese guy stood in front of tanks. Obviously, if you look at that picture, like a 10-year-old American kid is going to understand this is probably an authoritarian regime. Obviously, this dude standing here is a hero. Whatever you're told about that story must be the truth. And I would say that the more skeptical this audience has really learned, the more emotional a narrative is, the more skeptical you need to be at what you're being told. And that it's a great place to start, right? And I also think you nailed it. You know, we'll probably talk about more Russia tonight than China, but I found this myself. I started in the InfoWar thing by writing the Righteous Russia series because I was really inundated and I was really deep in that rabbit hole. And then later on, like 2 years later, I got into the China rabbit hole. And that's an even more difficult one to untangle, right? Even for people that are actively looking into it. Like the timeline you just laid out for China is really surprising to me. But man, if you're looking for signal, I think counter signal is often the best. And I like that you brought up George Soros. One of the things I've said before, there are 3 men that I'm aware of that George Soros has in recent years declared threats to global democracy. And that's Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping. So right when you get that, you can start kind of reverse engineering it. I do think we're getting some humble pie in the West. And yeah, how do you think, let's start there. I want to do some past, present, future here if we have time. For the present, we can do that pretty quickly. With what you just laid out, with what I just laid out, how do you see the narrative being constructive right now? Maybe on a good side, not the media propagandists, but kind of by Donald Trump, people around him, by Vladimir Putin, even by Xi and people around him, if you want to go in that direction, where we can stick with Russia and the US. But how do you see them helping to try to massage that story? Because I think they are trying to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that, as you pointed out, George Soros had called, the 2 greatest threats to his open society as Donald Trump's USA and Xi Jinping's China, and that same speech at the World Economic Forum in January of 2020, where he famously said it so explicitly, he called for the overthrow of Xi Jinping as well. Basically, it's Tiananmen Square 2.0 as the only solution to save salvage his open society vision of a world of perfectly open nations, so open that they're not really nations anymore. There's something else going on that's going to maintain order. Russia, I think, has clearly earned the ire of the thing that manages Soros. I don't even think that Soros is his own thing at the end of the day. If you look at his startup capital,
right?
Yeah, front man. His startup capital was given to him by Evelyn de Rothschild in 1968 to create quantum hedge fund. The guy's a front, clearly, but he's been he did a good job as a sociopath, and he's granted like a little mini dynasty for good service to the empire. But I think, with Trump, he made a lot of very loud, explicit maneuvers for a U.S., Russia, China alliance to tackle many of the world's issues, including the economic systemic breakdown. And this is something that he did repeatedly before COVID. COVID derailed some of that language. You couldn't use it anymore, but it was very explicit. And I think that we're seeing, especially on the Russia front, a real serious effort to create a positive relationship. We even had now discussions after there's been progress. I mean, there's still a lot more progress to go since Ukraine is such a basket case fake country at this point. It's so weaponized that it's hard to negotiate a peace process without having based on supposedly two countries, Russia versus Ukraine, when Ukraine's not even a country. They're negotiation non-capable. There's nothing there. And so because of that, Trump is, I believe, doing what he can do to create a climate with his Russian counterparts to put out some of those fires. I would say that the discussion around looking for economic opportunities that we've seen now over the last week, especially between U.S. and Russia, is great. Last thing I got some slides, but we don't need to look at slides right now. But basically, within one of my points that I've been making in a lot of my presentations, if you look at September 2020, that's when Trump gave an executive order to create the U.S.-Alaska Railway through Alberta. He passed an executive order. He congratulated the representatives and the senators who have been advocating this thing, as well as a bunch of very, very savvy business people in Alberta who could see that there was just total stagnation under the control of Ottawa, which is just a branch of the Crown in Canada. And they were able to create a consortium, the Alaska to Alberta Railway Consortium, that had this beautiful vision. All the engineering feasibility studies were done. They poured millions into it. It looks great. It would connect for the first time ever the lower 48 states with Alaska. And if you went to their original website, which got taken down, unfortunately, after Biden was installed, the original website, however, very clearly outlined an Arctic orientation that for the first time with rail up there, maybe even high speed, you could now begin to build feeder lines, rail and roads to other untappable but vast resources that Canada has in abundance, Alaska has in abundance. Oil, natural gas, you can't even imagine how much is up in Alaska that we can't tap into because we've never built infrastructure to get the equipment there in the first place. But it could be done very easily. And also they make the point that the Russia-China growth market would be the financial impetus for the investment into building this otherwise 5-year project. It would be pretty large scale. But that's the sort of right way of thinking. And I'm waiting to see a revival of that discussion now that we've got some more trust built in once again to the US-Russian dynamic. And if we do, then that all of a sudden ties us into the Bering Strait discussion, which I've been fighting for and inspired by since my days with the Lyndon LaRouche organization back in 2006 and 2007. That has been really revving my engine. And again, the Bering Strait, Putin made that offer in 2007 to George Bush and Dick Cheney. He came to the USA and he said, look, we can build, he offered $65 billion on the Russian side to start construction of a tunnel under the Bering Strait, connecting the Alaska to Russia through, into Vladivostok. And that's 2/3 of the cost just to build it. And he was turned down, and then he did it again. He came in 2011 and met with Barack Obama, offered the same thing. It was covered in Business Insider, saying, let's build the Bering Strait Tunnel. Let's have some good relationships and work together. And again, Obama shafted him and said, no, we're not going to talk to you on those things. It's only going to be to chastise you on your human rights. Russia just had suffered at that point an effort by a Soros white revolution, which failed miserably. But, there was a destabilization effort, and Russia was able to put it down. And that's all Obama wanted to talk about in 2011. So then China offered it in 2014. Global Times, the official state-run, one of the biggest state-run voices in China, advocated the Bering Strait Rail, which was the foundation for what became the Polar Silk Road, the extension of the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, into the Arctic, which people can Google that and look at the images or check out the articles that I've written on the WEF versus BRICS for Badlands Media and see the images of the Polar Silk Road, which is booming. Like, that's going to be the future. It's going to cut off 10 days of transit of goods from Rotterdam to Beijing through the through the Arctic of Russia. Russia's building up the longitudinal railway, connecting many and building new ports that are connected by rail in the far north. That's part of Putin's far eastern and Arctic development strategy. You've got the plan for 5 new science advanced cities. There you go. That's it right there. Yeah, that's this was my favorite rabbit hole you went down on the Badlands Substack. Again, I always say this stuff is free, guys. Badlands.substack.com. This one is the strategic importance of the Alaska-Canada Railway. And, we're skipping ahead to some of the future stuff, but I think we can reverse engineer this again into narrative structure. This is an example of the actuals, a lot of the stuff you're talking about. But I think what we acknowledge here is we've got a whole bunch of narrative in the way to navigate. I brought up this image. This is the first image I used to start my series years ago. Infamous, right? 2018 Helsinki Summit. Of course, if you're like Q community, you're like, what was in the soccer ball? And hey, I don't know. Like maybe there's stuff going on there. I do believe that there is a lot more behind the scenes coordination than some do. Probably never gonna have disclosure of exactly what that is. But I think some of the stuff Matt is talking about here, really helped shed light to me on a lot of people in our audience now, at least, are open to the idea or firmly believe that there is, I've been calling it the sovereign alliance. You can call it multipolarity, whatever, however far you want to take an alliance, a mutual agreement, you can go pretty far down there, or you can just say, hey, this is all pragmatism. This is sovereigns interacting with sovereigns. Why would the establishment, why would the globalists try to pit Russia and the US against each other so fervently, especially Trump and Putin? And, I would say that we saw a massive acceleration in that narrative right after Helsinki. That's when I know that they were always trying to tie Trump and Putin and everything, but man, did it accelerate in 2018 after that Helsinki summit. That's the first time I can recall normie family members and friends like repeating Trump is a Russian asset sort of talking points. And a lot of it, this is all just to say that a lot of what you talk about with these railways, with this Arctic kind of Belt and Road initiative, I think that starts to give people some hints besides taking down a satanic death cult that maybe we have some allies in, right? Like that's a lot of the big picture stuff. But if you just want to be really pragmatic about things, a lot of your research is like, hey, you don't have to go down that rabbit hole. You don't have to go down plan to save the world rabbit holes in order to see why the Open Societies Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the European Union would not want the United States and Russia to be allied, because in a very practical sense, if they are, then a lot of these legacy post-World War II international order really loses a ton of economic power projection. And one step further, I think one of the narratives we're seeing slow dripped to the normie filters is that if the US and Russia, and especially China, start to become not just not adversaries, but friendly in the public narrative, how do you justify all of the war machine, the NATO war machine, and all of the money that war machine takes in from us? Because ostensibly, who are we meant to be fighting, right? We're meant to be fighting the inevitable, eventual Russian Third Reich, Fourth Reich type of thing. And again, a lot of the stuff that you talk about with these economic agendas seem to provide a different angle there. So I'd want you to talk about what is it specifically, some stuff you hinted at, I think in that article and some others, that blew my mind was the idea that these sorts of partnerships between the United States and Russia have been in heavy discussions, like going back a long time, which was news to me. So if you want to talk about some of that and how it relates to what you just touched on in terms of what we could see in the future. Yeah, absolutely. And like we're all trying to develop a better skill at hypothesis formation, because there is a reality, there's facts that are unfolding, and we are not privy to the ideas and conversations that are making those facts happen for good or for bad. And so it's only, I think, when people shift gears and let go of this idea that there's no such thing as conspiracy theories, everything is done for pragmatic reasons of making money or whatever. It's only when you let go of that popular myth that you could start making better hypotheses about how history has actually been wired, because everything is conspiracy. From local, two people just having have a similar idea and collaborating to make it happen, to manifest that. Ideas govern everything. On the local scale, we can't even function as beings without some metaphysical concept of, like, I wake up in the morning, I want my coffee. Well, the coffee is not made. My sandwich isn't ready. So that idea that of that in the future is animating and shaping the unfolding of each one of my biologically measurable steps I take as I drowsily walk to the coffee machine, my percolator, and take my toast out of the toaster. Yep. So the future is shaping the unfolding of present moments on the small scale. And if you have power and you have access to a higher realm of high ideas, you can make very good or very bad things happen. And that's all of history. From Alexander the Great, he wasn't just a dude trying to make money. There was a whole conspiracy to install him and to train him to become the type of philosopher king who would be capable of running combat against the global Persian Empire that desired to have a global mystery cult of a high priesthood as a forever model that was thwarted by virtue of this guy who got assassinated at a very young age. But he was able to carry out some amazing flanks with the help of a whole network of intelligentsia, much of whom came out of Plato's Academy, to flank those maneuvers of the Persian high priesthood, which then had to sort of shift gears and try again, but this time by infiltrating Rome and transforming it from a republic into an empire, which they fundamentally were more successful at. But even that failed at a certain point. Christianity
and that trickled down into sort of the Prussian system, right? Like a lot of those. It's a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, it's
trickled down all the way there, right? So there's been, this idea, like you said, of the high ideas, and people can think. Obviously, this audience is very well versed in conspiracy. It's what all of us do, and to think that that's silly is ridiculous, as you point out, because history is made of conspiracy, right? It's also written by, obviously it's a cliche. History is written by the winners, but really it's not always written by like the practical winners. It's written by whoever's controlling the narrative. It's written by whoever's trying to guide it in the future. Like the current history that you're reading, I think that's an important distinction. It's not just like, oh, the history you're reading is whoever won the story. I think that's part of it. But I think a lot of it is you're also reading a lot of historical accounts of the people who are right now trying to create the future they want to see by informing everybody based on the histories they're reading at any given time.
I remember when you had January 6th, like a day, January 6th, within days. I think of Biden's inauguration, and they just began their first wave of political crackdowns on those who got targeted in the January 6th operation as an FBI CIA operation. You had a team of historians from Chatham House that came to America, and I can't find this damn article anymore, but I remember this very clearly at the time. It was announced, I think it was January 22nd or 23rd of 2021, that they came down with the mandate of writing the official narrative for future textbooks about what that was about, and the idea was to make it appear for the future minds of young people who were probably too young to even live through that moment, to think that moment was as bad, if not worse, than the Civil War in America, right?
Yeah.
So it's all a fight over the future minds of those unborn. That's where the real, I think, the oligarchy is very good at thinking at those long, subtle waves of the past and the deep future. The good guys are less good at that. We've been less effective, probably because good people tend to also, I think, externalize or project out their inner goodness, which is the natural, setting for a human baby is goodness. And if you don't encounter in your life the unnatural type of oligarchical, messed up, inside out world that only a few are groomed into becoming to maintain this very, very distorted, perverse structure of power control, like power. that's been there since ancient times, then you will presume the best out of others. And H.G. Wells even said it best. H.G. Wells, a leading Fabian eugenicist and predictive programmer who was really good, very talented at shaping sci-fi predictive programming scripts that would then be a blueprint for future, social engineering. Yep. He even said that the British Empire's greatest benefit is people's unwillingness to think of evil. He said it directly. So I think go on.
Well, I was just going to say, you just hit on a fantastic rabbit trail that we have to go down now, because that's the whole premise of this show, right? Is narrative. And certainly I don't need to convince people anymore. Everybody watching this show understands the power of narrative. I think you hit on something really important there. And I've said it in different words than you just did, but basically, Chris Paul and I do the Story Hour show on Tuesday nights, and we do movies. And it's, some people like it, etc., but it certainly isn't one of the highest watched shows on the network. And a lot of that is because a lot of our audience is just, they don't like watching movies. They don't like engaging with that stuff. They want to know the real news, Matt. Like, they want to know what's really going on. And one of the reasons that we were inspired to do that show is both of us, first of all, came from a liberal mindset. But both of us also were creative writers. Like, we had careers in that world. We were career storytellers. A lot of our friends were storytellers. And one of the things I've said for a long time is that the enemy understands, to your point, the power of storytelling and the power of narrative. So I totally agree with you about the setting of human beings, right? Like, I think that we're inherently good. I think that I just had a baby recently. He's 3 months old. You can't look at a baby and be like, this thing's a little shifty. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure if I got a good one here or not, right? Like, they're just good. They're just what they are. But I think that hits on what is maybe sobering to look at the past, but encouraging to look at the present. One of the things I've been saying about that I like about Donald Trump, about Vladimir Putin, about a lot of what I think is going on from a narrative perspective, is that I think maybe for the first time in a long time, the good guys have realized the power of storytelling. And I think that one of the reasons that you're accurately pointing out, the good side does not usually deploy narratives in the same way as the other side. And I think it's because the good guys don't want to ever seem inauthentic or like they're lying. And that's something that we actually talk about a lot on Badlands. Like, for example, John founded the network largely on the devolution operation theory. It's a theory, right? But a lot of us believe in it, that Donald Trump did something with the executive branch, with executive authority, and, devolved the powers of the president. Whether you believe that or not, that theory inherently relies on dishonesty on the part of otherwise good men. You've got good guys running clandestine operations. By definition, clandestine operations are secretive operations. By definition, if Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, to the topic of this discussion, have a deal in place, which I believe, they have the broad framework of a deal in place, well, why aren't they just bringing it out and telling everybody? And I think it's because, my opinion on that, is they recognize the battle space we're in, to quote Rich Higgins, former Trump advisor and, now deceased, rest in peace. The battle space they are in is controlled by enemy narrative. And what they're trying to do is undo so much of the programming that you're talking about tonight that's been seeded into the Western mind about Russia bad and China bad and Trump bad. So, is it lying when you're slow rolling a narrative and trying to translate it to the American people and say, hey, we're not going to tell you that the Russians are the good guys right now, but we are going to say, let's at least start talking to them. And hey, maybe your histories on these guys are not quite what you've been told. Like, I think there's more narrative strategy at work in what these guys are doing than maybe there has been on the quote unquote good side in the past.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And, like, the only way good people have been successfully able to conspire successfully throughout history, including the efforts to make the American Revolution itself happen, which could not have happened were it not for the collaboration of Tsarina Catherine the Great's Russia, which, right, organized the League of Armed Neutrality that guaranteed shipping lanes would be kept open for supplies, much needed supplies to the American farmer warriors who were at war with the largest, most organized world army ever with the British Empire. Again, Russia, how did Russia just randomly decide to do that because they were bored and they're looking at the game of Risk before Risk was created? And they're like, let's just do this League of Armed Neutrality to help out the small dog in the fight. No, there was organization amongst networks that were maintained by people like Benjamin Franklin, who was made the first American member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He made.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that was while he was an ambassador in France. And at that time, he also he was an organizer like I've never seen. I mean, you look at what this guy was able to accomplish, but he never laid out his cards, right? He didn't say, this is what I'm going to do. He never said that, which is why it's so easy for hating biographers to lie about what he was, because he was so good at keeping his mouth shut and putting out fake messaging. Look at his autobiography, right? It's got like a lot of good life lessons, but it's a lot of fake. Like, I just happened to, as a young guy, show up in Philadelphia and all of a sudden, I just had a little bit of bread and a lot of mud on my clothes. And I had a friend who invited me to go to the governor's mansion. And all of a sudden, and then, he's like, and then all of a sudden I got a job to be the postmaster general in like 1851. And it's like, that's not how things happen. Like, it's not all of a sudden. Things are being organized because people saw that Cotton Mather was organizing you. You had talent. You infiltrated the Hellfire Club. You got feedback for the patriots around Cotton Mather, who had already been battling this Hellfire Club penetration, that your older brother, John Franklin, who was organizing the primary printing press, and was setting up his own Hellfire Club with John Winthrop Jr. when he was like 90 years of age, got out of his bed and ran down the streets calling out Ben Franklin's older brother for not run down. He probably hobbled down the streets, but loudly called out his brother for setting up a Hellfire Club. And this is the thing that had taken control of the entire governing structure of the British Empire. This is what this guy, infiltrated. And that intelligence, counterintelligence he was able to gather, was very useful at helping patriots flank in various ways at a precarious time in the 18th century, various British imperial maneuvers. And he was able to build networks into France. Again, he made the Russian president of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Ekaterina Dashkova. He made her the first Russian member of his philosophical society. So you have all of these things, but these conspiracies don't work if people lay out their cards and just say what they're going to do. The sale of Alaska by Tsar Alexander II to it was brokered by William Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, who also survived his own assassination attempt the very night that Lincoln was murdered. That guy was like recovering, right? And he had like a giant exoskeleton because he had gotten something like, he got crushed by a horse and carriage 2 weeks earlier. So he was recovering, had an exoskeleton on him in his bed. When a guy comes into his recovery, I guess his bedroom, with a knife and tries to stabs him 20 times, misses all the vital organs because of his exoskeleton thing, is this giant frame. And this guy just recovers and gets back to work. Like within a month, he's back. They're made of tougher stuff, but he was able to negotiate behind the scenes in secret the sale of Alaska, Russian Alaska, to the United States on May 30th, 1869. The same year that the Transcontinental Railway was completed, that was begun in 1863, the moment that Russia came in with its naval fleets into the coast of the USA, of New York and San Francisco, saving the Republic at a precarious moment when it was likely that it was going to dissolve into, two pro-British confederacies that would undo the victories of 1776. And at that precarious moment, Russia came in, again, through organizing large-scale relationships that had been built up, even going back to John Quincy Adams and at his time as ambassador to Russia, when Tsar Alexander I asked him to become the godfather of his son, who would have been the Tsar later on. And he was like, nah, it's not really diplomatic protocol. But he set up the stage for George Washington Whistler to go and build the first railways, an American engineer who went to Russia to build the first railways connecting St. Petersburg to Moscow in the 1840s. it was America that stood with Russia in the Crimean War, which was set as a trap by the British and the French and the Ottomans to suck in Russia into a wasting war. And it was only the Americans that stood and said, no, we are with Russia, not with European powers. And through that bond of trust, Russia said, okay, we have to save America. And they Tsar Alexander II gave an interview with Wharton Barker, a pro-industrial banker, a friend of Lincoln, years later, saying that the reason why we did this was a clear signal to the British and the French with the message that if they were to go in officially, militarily backing up the Confederate South, which was their intention, that would be casus belli with Russia. And that kept those imperialists at bay and working covertly instead of overtly supporting the breakup of the Union in the Civil War. So again, because of that, you were able to have the effective launching of the Transcontinental Railway for the very first time. The nation build itself over land, connecting two great oceans as a continental power, manifesting more perfectly the promises or the hopes of the Continental Congress of 1776 and the Continental Army, right? So that was, again, that couldn't have happened if it was just America. That could only happen if you had a global chemistry with like-minded thinkers working together that were then able to say, okay, let's sell Alaska, with the idea that Lincoln had even put forth in 1864 at his as soon as he was elected a second time, and he gave a State of the Union, and people can read the transcript where he says the intention is to extend rail and telegraph lines through Alaska into the Bering Strait to connect into Russia, which is why also a lot of these same guys immediately went to Russia to help broker the Trans-Siberian Railway, built by Baldwin locomotives made in Philadelphia that circulated across the Russian tundra for years and years, which was only stopped by a lot of assassinations, a lot of sort of proto-George Soros regime change, like the Bolshevik Revolution, and a lot of murders of people like Garfield and McKinley, who then were, with their exit from the stage of history, all of a sudden a bunch of traitors and parasites were able to sort of take control for a while. And that's been the battle, that's been the shape. But it's always been U.S.-Russian friendship, and the idea that the U.S. and the Russians are somehow enemies, that's a brand new concoction made after World War II. The norm has been friendship, not enemy.
Very well said. And it's first of all, I need to correct you. The Hellfire Club is actually known as a Marvel Comics club. These are X-Men villains. No, but I did actually laugh because that's the first thing that popped into my head when you said Hellfire Club. And it makes me think of predictive programming, right? Where you're like, what happens when a kid Googles the Hellfire Club in 2025? They get the X-Men villains. And this audience is well aware that there are many examples of that. Like, you start trying to look into who are the Illuminati. You're also going to get like Marvel villains when you look into the Illuminati. If you look into the Hellfire Club, it's actually interesting too. You mentioned the Trans-Siberian Railway, etc. And, speaking of storytelling, it's so funny because when you said that, you're talking about all these murders, these assassinations that happened, not necessarily literally on the railway, but around it, around the deal makers around the railway. And I started looking into a lot of that stuff after you were writing these articles. But isn't it so interesting that from a fiction perspective, both Russian and American literature, fiction, they deal heavily with murder mysteries on the Trans-Siberian Railway, on transcontinental railways. Like that's like a genre of 1800s, early 1900s fiction. British fiction, Russian fiction, American fiction. You've got like Anna Karenina, all this kind of stuff. And it's so funny to kind of, you sort of, when you dig into this stuff, you start reading behind the context of why certain tropes became tropes in literary fiction. Like, why did certain conspiracies really take over the zeitgeist of fiction? And the railways. I mean, we even had a recent remake of Kenneth Branagh did like Murder on the Orient Express, and like all these old school, like you've got shadowy figures and business types doing deals on 1800s railways. And there's probably a little bit more truth to that than we think. But the conclusion you came to there, that is what truly blew my mind when I was really digging into Russia. That started with the idea of, hey, if Russia isn't the bad guys that we've been led to believe, maybe they're actually the opposite. Maybe they're the good guys, or could be at least. And I think in one of the early parts of that series, I titled it The Three Stories of Russia, and it was really going through the history of 1900s Russia, especially beginning with the murder of Tsar Nicholas II. And man, for Western eyes, and if anybody in our audience has not delved into that stuff, even on a surface level, it really starts to put the picture together, I think, of who the bad guys are on a very macro lens and who the good guys are on a macro lens. And when you lay out everything you just did about all the coordination, all the almost coordination between the US and Russia from the founding of the American Republic straight through to the czars, it is very difficult for me to sit here and say, yeah, these were just pragmatic businessmen who had common interests and maybe common ideologies in the US and Russia. It feels much more like, to me, more likely that we have had figures in the know who know exactly what kind of globalist collectivist, it's gone through many names, right? From the Rhodes Scholars to the Deep State to the Illuminati, whatever you want to call these things, the sects of these collectivists, I guess. There's people that have known who these people are, and they have been trying to work with each other to cut them out. That's how I feel about it. I think it's, as you kind of pointed out, it's very difficult for me to look at things like McKinley and things like Tsar Nicholas, etc., and now things like Trump and Putin, and to say, is this really just 2025 pragmatism coming to the fore? Or when somebody like John Harold on Badlands pulls up an interview with Donald Trump from 1987, which blew our minds, and he's talking about, they said, what would you do? Because he said in that interview with Time Magazine, I believe, world peace should be easy to achieve. And they said, well, how would you do it if you're Mr. World Peace? How would you become the peacemaker? And he said, the only key to world peace is the Soviets. You need an American leader who deals directly with the Russian leader. That's the way to mandate sort of a lasting world peace. And as you said, it seems like the powers that be have known that the only way to keep world peace from happening is to make sure that the US and Russia are not coming to the table in any meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why they put so much effort at the time that they did in accelerating the installation of a bunch of Esalen Institute traders inside of Russia and China at the same time. It was always understood that the possible alliance of Russia and China would represent a power base that would be too strong to easily defeat, and especially, God forbid, Iran would come into that mix. Like Zbigniew Brzezinski even said that type of Iran-Russia-China alliance would be the only possible threat in 1997 of the New World Order that he had devoted his entire life into bringing online. And, like I said, it wasn't just through Soros operations. You had people like Lawrence Rockefeller, the forgotten, but I would say probably the most powerful of the five Rockefeller brothers, David, Nelson, forgot the other one. But Lawrence is really, really big. This guy was the bankroller of much of what was going on with Esalen, the SRI material, stuff like that. All of the stuff that became the revolution in military affairs in the early 80s. The bringing in of Michael Aquino and the Satanists, the Sethians, into the official branch of U.S. high command with top secret clearance. So that seems fake when you're reading it. Like you wrote up an article about that, I believe, with Aquino in it, and that when I say it seems fake, I mean it's so ridiculous. Yeah. When you read about Michael Aquino and you're like, the guy looks like the Satanist that he openly professes himself to be, and he was a member of a high command. I know. And it's like, I think they groomed a number of these freaks in Vietnam in Operation Phoenix who were, it seemed like a satanic ritual as far as the 40,000 people murdered, mostly civilians. It was a psychological terror operation that wiped out whole villages, focusing on murdering children and women as part of psychologically breaking the Viet Cong fighters in the bushes. And I think that, Colonel Alexander, John Alexander was working also on Operation Phoenix, as was Michael Aquino, as was Edward Lansdale. And it seems like they were getting the Marlon Brando treatment, you know, like from Apocalypse Now, like that sort of thing seems to be what was done by design to create, because there's only so many opportunities in life where you can kill a whole village full of innocent people and get away with it. War is one of those times. The Boer War was another one of those times where all of the vanguard mercenaries of the Rhodes Milner Roundtable Group got their sort of bloodletting and initiation in the fires of that Boer War that was against again mostly civilians, black and white. So they have this dual use. It's not just purely practical geopolitical reasons why they have wars. There's also this other thing of training the next generation of manager, and that's what Aquino appears to have been, as he created his own sub-branch or seeming breakaway of the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, and brought in all of these weird characters into high-level positions within the U.S. military that then did things like Desert Storm, Iran-Contra, later on 9/11. It seems like these things couldn't have been possible had you not had the positioning of these satanic freaks, which, Lawrence Rockefeller was a big bankroller behind a lot of this stuff. And he situated Yeltsin, who was brought into Esalen to get, whatever mystic sex orgies and whatever, and a bunch of mystical Kremlin agents into California, Big Sur, to take part in this conspiracy to create the end of history. And Gorbachev was certainly a supporter of this thing and voluntarily just took apart the Soviet Union at the same time as he was writing the Earth Charter with Maurice Strong of Canada. They were at 1992, they were co-drafting with, was it William Rockefeller, Lawrence Rockefeller's nephew, Maurice Strong and Gorbachev were drafting the Earth Charter that was adopted at the Rio Summit that created the Agenda 21, the entire sort of global dissolution of the nation state system for local bioregions. That thing was what Gorby was doing as he was breaking up and getting ready to bring about perestroika and the privatization of Russia. That is what exactly happened. So if Trump's idea back in the early 80s and late 80s was successful, none of that would have happened. You would have had a very hopefully we're seeing a revival of those otherwise very good, powerful ideas take hold once again around large-scale infrastructure, economic cooperation, space cooperation. There's so many points, Arctic, that could unite us in really a common destiny that would be much better than the type of death cult mass murder that the oligarchy wants to bring about.
I think it's ironic in the truth community, whatever you want to call what we do, that I've said before, my own awakening to a lot of this stuff, it usually comes in the form of darkness, right? Like you don't usually wake up because somebody tells you a bunch of really cool, awesome stuff, right? Like you're not walking around and somebody's like, listen, man, like you're not sitting around the campfire and they're like, listen, do you even know how awesome things are? Like maybe we're going to get there. Usually you've had a few beers and there's that one guy that's like, did you guys know Russia's the good guys and that we've been fighting a satanic death cult for the last century? Or did you know that the Federal Reserve creates its own money out of nothing and is neither federal nor reserve, right? There's always the one guy. But what you just mentioned about Aquino and everything, I mean, when you use the word satanic, that's the kind of language that normies and particularly the mainstream media will seize on with conversations like this and call us fucking crazy, right? Except, encouraging little bit of signal here, you know what it made me think of? There's nothing new under the sun. All of this stuff is related, and the article I was just bringing up is a recent Zero Hedge piece. Now, this is not about Vietnam, it's not about Russia, but I think it is. Cremation ovens, teeth, and torture. Grisly extermination camp found in Mexico. I don't know if you saw this story, but, the cartels have been in the news quite a bit. This was a New York Times report, actually. A mass grave was found, where was this? Mexico's years-long plague. Guadalajara, a village near Guadalajara. So basically what happened here is the remnants of a death camp was found, this was very recently, by Mexican authorities who are supposedly stepping up their efforts, due to the pressure being put on them by the Trump administration. And so before we get to that little skull picture down there, this is what we're seeing, right? Mass graves, 700 personal items, mass burial graves, women, children, the works, right? At these cartel sort of what we were told were drug processing facilities or cartel outposts. What they really were, it seems like, was something else, some sort of death camp. And now, scrolling down a little bit more, to your point you make about Aquino and what did you call it? Operation Phoenix? Yeah. So, some of this stuff that is clearly not just pragmatic, clearly not just logistical, but spiritual, darkly spiritual. This is an altar that they found at the site, and this is not unique to this site. So here's the description. This altar dedicated to Santa Muerte was found by authorities who raided a house in Ecuador. Several figurines of the gang-revered Bony Lady were found at the extermination camp. So this is the Bony Lady, apparently, and this is a sculpture or a depiction that is often found in Tren de Aragua drug dens, MS-13, any of this stuff that we're seeing in the United States right now. So everything you're talking, this is why, one of the reasons I focus on narrative is because when you start sort of engaging with things on a narrative level, you can start to map these similarities. And, the more you allow yourself to go down the rabbit holes you're talking about, you're going to understand your enemy more, not when you dismiss the idea that there is a satanic, truly evil ideology behind these people, but when you embrace and acknowledge that idea, things will start clicking into place in a way that, as you said earlier in the show, one of the biggest cognitive dissonance walls that all of us hit when we try to talk to normies is they frankly just are not willing to believe that we're dealing with this kind of evil, right? One more point on it would be, when you think of drug cartels in the modern Western zeitgeist, a normie, I would argue that the first thing that they're going to think of is Breaking Bad, Narcos, that kind of stuff, right? They're thinking of Ozark. They're thinking of mass media criminality and murder, but that is built around money and it's people getting involved with the wrong people. You're not seeing Lady Death depicted in Ozark, right? You're not seeing mass death camps depicted in Narcos. And I think that this is one of the ways that through mass media manipulation, they're willing to tell you that drug cartels are bad. They're not going to start telling you that MS-13 and Tren de Aragua are death cults that are being run probably by the same sort of death cult that has been, again, combating the American Republic and subverting the Russian Republic for literally over a century.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like you think you know what you're looking at, and then the more you learn about the context in which that thing occurs, the more that thing all of a sudden changes with your knowledge. And things like the mafia, that like you said, it's been turned into so many shows, Sopranos, Godfathers, and all these things.
They're almost anti-heroes now.
They're almost anti-heroes. And even, I've had friends who had family in certain low-level organized crime, and you go to their bars and they have like Godfather posters framed on the walls of their bars and restaurants. And it's like, this is actually organizing, despite the fact that nothing good happens to anybody in the Godfather trilogy. Everything bad happens to everybody. But despite that, it's almost become archetypes that has fed back into shaping the character of those wannabe vigilante. They're going to protect their neighborhoods. There's some honor and virtue.
Yeah, right.
But you gotta dance with darkness too. It's not simply making money. It's not pragmatic. There's a religious driving force at the core of these unnatural systems. And when you start unpeeling that, you bounce into Satanism left and right. Yeah. Because that's the thing with so-called, I hate using the word normies, but it's true. It's a word. It's a thing. It's a thing. So the problem is that they can't imagine what would be the motive. Why would there be transgenerational operations, transgenerational, the people who are putting things into motion are going to be long dead before the manifestation of those things. And they can't think of those basic like motives that animate them. And your average plebe is just animated by, I need to pay my bills, I need to make money, I want to maybe have some prestige, a good reputation, little local things like that animate your average person. But when you get into the religious aspect of evil, which is profoundly philosophical, like you have to have some philosophical muscle to be able. Evil's not a simple thing. It's not like Lex Luthor, and that's another thing I think with the comic books is they gave us these overly simplistic archetypes of Superman who just needs to do good because he must, and Lex Luthor who just wants to rule the world because, I don't know, insecurity.
Yeah, bad guy do bad things, right?
Yeah, right. And it's like, it's so much more rich and sophisticated and interesting when you actually get into it, but also disturbing as sin, because you start discovering that all of these things and these mafia operations have Satanists at the inner core who seem to be sanctioned by higher Satanists that are in the middle of operating fronts like United Fruit, or the CIA. If you look at Alan Dulles and his relationship to a lot of the occult practices that were going on in Switzerland while he was a CIA, and before that OSS, and then before that even he was an intelligence agent working in Switzerland. That was the center of black mass of Eastern Europe since the Middle Ages, and probably since the Roman Empire. That's where he was based, at what became like the Monteverita Ascona sect of anarcho-Satanists around Mikhail Bakunin. Bertrand Russell was there. All of them were doing rituals to Beelzebub and Moloch. So that's part of our history. Like, that's part of the reality. And if people don't look at that, they won't have a full picture. They won't be able to make good hypothesis.
Yeah, and I think, and again, to try to, one of the encouraging things about this is I use the term narrative convergence a lot. I think we're seeing that. I think one of the major convergences that I talk about a lot that is very front of story right now is the analogs between the Trump story and John F. Kennedy. One of the funny things I often tell like liberal friends when I'm trolling them is, like laying out a bunch of Trump policies, but pretending they're JFK policies. And they're signing off on all these policies because they think they're Kennedy policies. Turns out they are, and they're also Trump policies because they're the same guy. Like, in terms of, the analogs are incredible when you just look at what were all of Kennedy's deployments, what did he want in terms of government, in terms of intel agencies, in terms of relations with Russia, etc. It's like beat for beat for beat for beat. And then, man, isn't it crazy that they took that guy out? They tried to take this guy out. And what you mentioned, too, with the Satanism, etc., and it's part of our history. And speaking of Kennedy, one of the most infamous speeches that Kennedy delivered that this audience is very well aware of is, the very word secrecy is repugnant to a free and open society. And what's so interesting about that speech that Kennedy gave, I think, is that he wasn't just talking about clandestine secrecy. The terminology he is using in that speech, I mean, he is talking about secret societies, right? Like, it so often, JFK historians and even conspiracy theorists, they sort of, I think, put like a vanilla filter over a lot of the stuff Kennedy said. And they're like, see, he didn't like the CIA. He said he was going to splinter it into 1,000 pieces. Yes, that's true. He also said that it was a secret society. And that is signal, right? Like, when you dive into these rabbit holes, Kennedy was not naive. He didn't think that the CIA was just a corrupt government organization. He was telling you, in my opinion, he knew exactly what the CIA was and exactly, who was behind it. Unfortunately, maybe the one thing that Kennedy underestimated was how powerful these people were, and maybe the lengths they were willing to go to stop that discovery. But to me, the word secret society, the term secret society, that's not somebody talking about intel agencies. That's somebody who's talking about powers that still exist to this day, behind the powers that, he probably was pretty surprised at how far it went once he actually got in there.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he's like, I think he moved a little bit. It was a miracle that he even got in there. I mean, you look at the consistency of his anti-imperial deep self-awareness and strength of character from his time as a journalist to becoming a congressman and traveling to Africa and Asia and Palestine and just speaking very concretely and clearly with cogency and knowledge as long before he became president. And I think a lot of that probably had to do with his time as a veteran, risking his life. And, you have to go deep inside of yourself if you're going to do something like that and be in those situations. And I think he became a very strong person, despite some of the negative influences within his family that were perhaps a little bit too pro-mafia, pro-British, pro-fascist like his father. But despite that, his brother, maybe his older brother, who also died under mysterious circumstances, right? Flying a test aircraft in 43 or 44. Yeah, right. His older brother was supposed to be that was the family gem who was supposed to be the president.
Man, I forgot about that. He never gets talked about. You're right.
No, yeah, and I don't know much about him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was already embracing his patriotic identity early on, perhaps. So anyway, it's a miracle that he got in there, but he did because of, again, support. You still had people who were very angry about what had happened when Franklin Roosevelt died, when the OSS was replaced by the CIA and the Anglo-American special relationship was put online, right, to bring in the Truman Doctrine and essentially defend British interests around the world with the idea that if they don't stay under the control of the World Bank, the IMF, effectively the City of London, then they would possibly fall under the sway of the communists. So we have to do everything, including mass murder of civilians, regime change, targeted assassinations of Patrice Lumumba and countless others, because everything is justified in this Manichaean formula of we're the good guys and those are the evil guys, and thus evil must be done by the good in order to defeat evil, which kind of is defeating. There's some contradictory thoughts in there, but whatever. That's what we went along with, and there were people who were able to work through. I think Douglas MacArthur played an important role as a player behind the scenes, helped Kennedy to achieve power, and then to keep him sort of astute about some of the vipers in his midst, who turned out to be kind of everywhere. Except it's like, who could he trust? At a certain point, it was like him and his brother with their backs to each other against almost everybody to varying degrees, who turned out to be
I forget the name of the group. Recently, actually the first episode of this show, I had Absolute on, and big Kennedy guy, and we were talking about 13 Days, the infamous movie, and forget the group, but they had founded a specific intelligence sharing group, advisors to the president, that consisted of Robert Kennedy and then their buddy from Framingham, Mass. I forget his, but I think he's the one Kevin Costner plays in that movie. But it's interesting when you look at, again, analogs to the modern Trump administration, and you're like, what's he known for? He's known for keeping his own unorthodox private circles. He's got Howard Lutnick, who's been orbiting him for 30 years. I believe I'm a bit of a wacky conspiracy theorist. I am one of those people that believes that Trump is not nearly as dumb as some people think he is. And I think it's really interesting that some of the guys in his cabinet in the second administration are not the guys from the first. More specifically, when you look into a lot of the guys in Trump's second administration, they are longer-term allies and friends of Trump from the business world going back to the 80s and 90s. So I think it's really interesting that in his first administration, he did not have those guys in it. But in the second one, which has more of a warlike posture, he does have all of those guys in it, the Lutnicks of the world, etc., the sort of the New York real estate mafia. So that's all interesting. I know you got to take off soon, but I want to hit you with a couple more quick things if I can. That may be quick or not, depends on you. Tiny little topics. So speaking of U.S. Russia, I want to hit you with the pragmatic angle, and then ending on and going back to sort of the spiritual angle. By the way, guys, if you like the show, please hit the thumbs up button. It really does help a lot with these shows. Gets us up on the leaderboard. People on Monday watch. And if you want to, I'm going to hang out a little bit after Matt takes off and talk to you guys. So if you want to send over a Rumble rant, please do, or a boost or anything like that. From a pragmatic angle, when we're talking about U.S.-Russia and, why this alliance or partnership has been combated so much by the powers that we're talking about, and maybe why Trump and Putin and Xi see this as having a lot of potential. Pragmatic angle, this chart that was in the article we shared earlier that you wrote struck me. Just a simple, map here that you had put into your article. It doesn't have to be this specifically, but generally speaking, from a business, globalism versus sovereignty, free trade versus collectivism, do you think this is the practical reason why the globalists, why the powers that be are so intent on keeping the United States, China, and Russia at each other's throats? Is there something inherent in a lot of this, these trade routes, the Arctic in particular, to you that presents a big threat to the current world order of how the collectivists, the globalists are doing business?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's multiple layers, right? There's not just one layer being true. It's, I think, all layers simultaneously being true of motive. And some people do things for money. And it's true, some people will look at that and see pure, wonderful profits. You could make billions of dollars cutting 10 days of shipping time off of goods between Rotterdam and Beijing by avoiding the Straits of Malacca, the Suez Canal zone, the highly, tumultuous Red Sea area. It's incredible how much time and savings can be had by moving things through the Arctic corridor, the Northwest Passage. The associated overland rail routes. I mean, there's 5 new cities being built up or planned to be built up according to this program by Putin in the Arctic and the Far East that aligns with building overland rail connections, the doubling up of the current Trans-Siberian rail resources. That's also planned, of course. It's behind schedule since the Ukraine debacle has absorbed or sucked out a lot of the financial resources that were supposed to go towards these types of broader, authentic nation-building strategies. But of course, it also ties people into the idea that we can trust our neighbors, people from a different civilization that might speak a different language, have a different religion, but they're human first. And because of that, we all can collaborate on making the life better for our children, creating abundance for them, which is what we all want before we die. And that's the basis upon which real trust can happen. And when you have that awareness of the other and that true type of not woke liberal tolerance, but real tolerance that comes from real understanding, then all of a sudden the oligarchy, it becomes more difficult to maintain divide to conquer tactics of getting us to be afraid of and to organize around fear. Because you can organize a society around hope or fear. And they abuse the hope thing around the Obama language where it's devoid of substance. But if you have real hope, it's because you're doing something to actualize that hope into reality. It's reasonable hope, not irrational. And so the oligarchy would prefer that we be organized around a fear of the other, a fear of invasions, that the commies want to get us, whatever. Keep us in a state of where our creative powers are at a minimum. We don't think with our heart, animating our analytics. And so because that we become inclined towards bestialization of fighting, going into crusader mode, getting into unwinnable, forever wars in parts of the world we don't belong in. And that was what John Quincy Adams was saying. We must never allow ourselves to go out chasing monsters to destroy. If you do that, we lose our soul. We fall into the machinations of the oligarchy, who are really good at doing that. So no, I think that type of collaboration around the Polar Silk Road is what people were just watching right there, would immediately bring into question the economic potentials of collaboration with the USA and Canada more broadly, which has been, we in Canada have been stagnant, like we talked about last week, under 200 years of controls of the British Empire that kept our populations low, our land undeveloped, as a wedge blocking U.S.-Russian friendship and U.S.-Russian-Chinese friendship.
Right.
So that type of thing would really help to break people creatively out of this closed cage, this system that we've been locked into. And I think on the higher level, there'd be a spirit of creative brotherhood that the founding fathers talked about, an age of creative reason, not just an age of logic, of scientific management of society, but an age of creative reason, which is something that's founded upon the idea that we're all made in the image of a creator, that we could participate in that creation. And that's the basis upon which natural law is founded. and that we become better, and the oligarchy loses their ability to stick their tentacles into us as we become better, more self-aware, more, grounded optimists for the right reasons. So yeah, I think that's what I see when I look at that map, is all of those things that probably scared the oligarchy for those reasons.
The little things. I do want to hit you on one more thing on that note you just left off on, but I'm showing on the screen here. I've been saying this on the Power Hour. This is just my opinion, but if you think that Trump and Putin and Moscow and Washington are talking about joint economic projects and joint energy projects and trans-Arctic routes, etc., and we've got here rare earth deals, economic cooperation, energy deals, etc., 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 and you don't think that they're, in my opinion, far beyond the point that we're told that they're at in the media. I mean, I think these are the hints. I think that between the headlines of like, Trump holds phone call with Putin and the two decided that they're not going to kill each other on Wednesday, you're getting Putin going like, yeah, we're already talking about joint massive economic projects with the United States. That's the kind of stuff that I think, to your point on Ukraine, the Ukraine narrative is slowing down a lot of those narratives, but I don't think it's going to stop that cooperation. The last thing I want to hit you with is what you kind of just ended on there. We ended up talking about sort of Satanism tonight and everything, and I love, that's why I like being able to let this show go where it goes. That perfectly brings me back to another one of the rabbit holes that I was very surprised at going down in my Russia research, was just simply the Orthodox Christian history of Russia, and specifically the constitutional and, more important, I guess maybe more to the point, cultural moves that Vladimir Putin made in the 90s and early 2000s to really resuscitate, or at least maybe embolden, that ideology and that Orthodox Christian sort of spirituality and culture in Russia. So I guess to kind of bookend what we talked about, where, hey, if we're saying the enemy, they've got an ideology behind them, they have a belief system behind them. Do you see that spiritual angle, whether it's Christianity or just goodness, do you see that as another thing that explains a lot of this war we've been seeing, trying to keep the U.S. and Russia separated? Because again, you've got Russia steeped in Orthodox Christianity, and when you look back at the founding fathers of the United States, you could argue that they were very similar ideologically and spiritually to a lot of the Russians of the time. Is that another angle to this war that could be persisting to the modern day?
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Yeah, I love the way you frame that. And no, I think that I don't want to open up the door to the whole like schism of the 11th century that artificially broke up the West and the East into warring factions. But I think the wake of that is still being felt very much on the current situation, and the idea, I think, of Putin and those like Primakov and other members of the intelligentsia in enforcing or encouraging the growth of these traditional Christian Orthodox cultural values is a very important part of their ability to wage war against this oligarchy, which is primarily a cultural war. And if they can get us to put down our sentinels, our value sentinels, and confuse them into becoming convinced that there's no such thing as truth, that all truth is relative based upon our personal individual relativist experiences of things and our feelings, which are, I mean, frankly, you could feel the wrong thing for the right reasons or the right thing for the wrong reasons. Like, feelings are very ephemeral. And so the oligarchy wants us to found our idea of truth on pure arbitrary feelings. And the way to withstand that is located very nicely within a lot of the core deep cultural values that gave rise to the best of these different civilizations, of which Orthodox Christianity was its form in Russia. In China, I watch a lot of Chinese soap operas and period pieces with my wife. She got me onto it. I would waste time looking on Netflix, just trying to scroll to find something that wouldn't make me feel like I was getting manipulated.
Right.
And I like watching social engineering material. I do.
Yeah, yeah. As long as you know that that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's enjoyable to watch Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and stuff. But at the end of the day, there's just so much baggage and bad intentions that I so clearly see in so many shows that I just give up on. And I feel like I've just wasted hours trying to find something. Whereas she was like, well, why don't you watch some of these South Korean and Chinese period pieces, which take place in the Han Dynasty or the Tang Dynasty, and they're sophisticated. They've got moral, intellectual lessons in every show. They're long, but they give you a real sense of the best and the worst of human nature. And they're really challenging the audience to become the best part of themselves imaginable, and teaching Confucian principles and sometimes Buddhist principles that are of the highest quality, that make people better and that show them how this culture war was waged going back millennia against the satanic death cults, which come up in Chinese period pieces too. There's actually, there's like Taoist death cults that have been there, that have organized the black magicians and sorcerers, the sorcerer kings of Chinese history at various times when the population has gone into war, into decay, into famine by design throughout Chinese history. You could see and measure the collapse of population and look at the times that you had Taoist death cults managing the upper control system of that society, and at times where there's been population growth, abundance, printing, new discoveries. That's when periods that you've had real valid Confucian Renaissance periods, of which I see currently being organized right now in China. Same thing in Russia. So I'd like to see something moving, and I see that the currents are moving in that direction to start creating content that is both entertaining and also carries values that make the audience better people. We see it with Chosen a little bit. I haven't seen that, but Reese, I saw somebody in the chat mention one good show recently that I was surprised at how good it was Shogun, the new FX adaptation of Shogun. So I would recommend that you and your wife check that out. 10 episodes, super well done. Hiroyuki Sanada, like my favorite Japanese actor, really, really well done. And the rare modern series that I would say has a strong female character that is not the modern trope of the strong female character, right? Like, it's not that template. It's like, no, it's all makes sense what's going on. I will push back on one point. Chat's not going to let me get away with it, which is that you are right in saying that modern adaptations of Tolkien are immoral. No, I like
classic.
Tolkien. I like Tolkien a lot.
Yeah. But there's a lot of modern bullshit around, like Rings of Power is communist drivel.
That's more what was in my mind. What I was saying. Exactly. That I like Tolkien. I read the books. I watched the movies. They're great.
It's the modern adaptations of it is just modern ideology. And man, I love that you brought up Taoism. Like I was a martial artist and kind of went down those rabbit holes for a while. And isn't it so funny that, like you point out, you go in any culture and you're going to get this period of time where moral relativism just takes hold. And it's like, nothing matters. This is the new philosophy, right? And you got to be careful of that.
Yeah.
But all right. I'll let you go, Matt. I know you got a lot going on. I really appreciate it. Coming back twice in a row. We'll have you on again. There's obviously no shortage of things we can discuss. And the audience has loved the discussions. So thanks again for joining, and I'll see you pretty soon.
All right, cool. Take care. Bye.
All right, man. All right, guys. So I'm going to hang out a little bit longer if you guys want to. Really what's going on is I saw Mrs. Bright rascaling around in the chat, and she was telling me that my son was being very bad tonight and not going to sleep. So that's when we do our ASMR coffee refill. We're all in this together. And the longer I stay on screen with you guys, the longer I delay having to change the diapers. She has to be on diaper duty. This is game theory, right? High-level game theory. He's sleeping right now. His move is to wake up as I am getting off the show and getting into all my other work, because I still do work a day job. And man, there's a lot going on around these parts. I thought that was a good show. I really like that. We actually did mostly stick to what I wanted to talk about, which was the narratives around the US and Russia. So many ways that can go. I really like that Matt went into sort of the belief structures behind a lot of our collectivist enemy. And, again, you can reverse engineer that. I think it goes both ways. I think it's easy to look at that and be like, man, there's death cults everywhere you look. You throw a rock, you're going to hit a death cult, especially when you're looking into history. But it also looks like there's some pushback to that. Matt last week on the show brought up Hamlet. I was going to reference that before he got off. But one of the quotes from Hamlet that turned me, that stuck in my brain, is another piece of moral relativism that our youth is inundated with, especially our intellectual youth, is from Hamlet. And that is, there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That is one of Hamlet's soliloquies into the night sky as he is being a little bitch and perhaps the first official simp of Western literature. Yes, Ash, I do mean The Lion King. But what is Shakespeare saying in that soliloquy? He is giving birth to the modern Western version of moral relativism, which is all about there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. The Shogun show I mentioned, I saw somebody in the chat had said Shogun, that's what popped into my head. One of the only modern shows I have watched that I really liked. It was very true to the source material, and it actually deals with a lot of the subversion of Western missionaries. There might have been good Western missionaries that truly believed in the philosophies that they were espousing, but then there was a lot of missionaries who were only there as de facto emissaries of the British Empire because they knew that the locals would not treat with overt representatives of the British Empire, right? So you throw some emissaries in there, some missionaries rather, and the show does a good job of kind of showing you that these missionaries, these spiritual leaders and gurus, were often trying to destabilize the local culture. But a lot of the ways that they try to destabilize local cultures is going after local belief systems and local religion. In that series, people in this audience might initially be kind of taken aback by it because, you've got these Christian Japanese walking around with their crosses and everything. But you kind of dig a little deeper into the history of that time, and I would suggest that the Christianity depicted in feudal Japan was not really analogous to the sort of Christianity that many of you sort of believe in. It was more of a political Christianity, a Western ideology. And one of the interesting things I love Japanese culture, very different from Western culture, but I'm super into it, and was from a very young age. And despite not being a very theistic culture, monotheistic culture, they weren't necessarily pagans, but there was for a society that didn't really have a monotheistic culture, this is the creator, this is our moral code, handed down to us, etc. It was known as one of the most moral cultures, or at least rigid, this is the right way to be and this is the wrong way to be. A lot of that came from Bushido. It was steeped in the martial arts. And also we had Shintoism is something that I like quite a bit. It's just sort of the idea that the natural world, natural shrines, natural objects, God's creations have an energy and a spirit to them. And these things get crunchy granola, and New Age liberals turn all this shit into Taoism, which Matt referenced there. And I fell into that for a little while when I was a teenager, like doing my katas and fighting in tournaments and being like, yeah, I guess maybe there is no good or bad. Except when you really get into Bushido, when you really get into the honor code, they were very deeply spiritual people, even if they weren't praying to a specific god. So great show, worth checking out. I want to hit on just a couple of things before we get out of here, and then I will get to your rants, and very much appreciate that. As we always say, you guys are literally the ones who support us and make us able to do these shows. The extra shekels are helpful with Baby Bright. Mrs. Bright is going back to the office part-time this week. So we're going to see how that goes. Otherwise, things are going great. I thought I would let Donald Trump himself sort of put a coda onto the conversation between Matt and I. With everything we talked about tonight, the strategic, the pragmatic threats that a US, Russia, and Chinese partnership could pose to the globalist establishment, let's revisit one of Trump's recent statements after his first very publicized phone call with Putin, and try to look at it with new eyes after this discussion. So Trump says, "I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people, and we, likewise, lost so many. We each talked about the strengths of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine." Notice how he puts Russia/Ukraine. I'm telling you that Trump actually knows how he's structuring these things, or whoever's putting these out. From a phonetic perspective, from a syntax perspective, is he suggesting what Matt said tonight and what we've said many times, which is that Ukraine is not a real country? Is Donald Trump putting Russia/Ukraine because, according to English grammar, when you put a slash there, you are literally saying either or? In other words, is Donald Trump telling you, if you have the eyes to see it, that Ukraine is Russia and that Russia is Ukraine and that there was never any such thing as Ukraine? Some kooks like me would tell you that's exactly what he's doing. Continuing, he says, "President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. We'll begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I've asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, we'll talk about him in a minute, to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president. But it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost. I want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, blah, 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 blah. I believe this effort will lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon." So you're allowed to read that as just normal PR. We had a good call. We're bros now. You're also allowed to read it for what it is, in my view, which is a disclosure of what we've been talking about, what we talked about tonight. The US and Russia have not only never been natural enemies, the reason that we've been conditioned with the narrative that we are natural enemies is because we are precisely the opposite. We are the most natural allies there could possibly be, from a cultural perspective, from a spiritual perspective, ideology, morality, everything, physically, origins, like it's all right there. All the stuff you're not supposed to talk about. We're the same thing. Russians are the same as us. We're the same as them. So we're the most natural allies there could be. Couple other points on recent Russia shenanigans. I think this is just the narrative we're being sold. This is recent. Putin pressures Trump to recognize the annexed eastern territories captured. So this is the negotiation going on right now, right? And I'll try to leave aside how annoyed this can make me at times. But Steve Witkoff, speaking of, was on Tucker Carlson yesterday or the day before, talking about the stuff that he claims nobody wants to talk about. I get it. I understand it's narrative deployment. I also don't appreciate being admonished by massive, highly paid social media influencers purporting to be MAGA who say that, they're the new gatekeepers and they get to tell us how far down the story path we're allowed to go. You don't get to decide what normies can and can't deal with. I can talk about a lot of this stuff and agree that, yeah, that's probably what the Patriots are doing. They're slow dripping this stuff for a reason. I can acknowledge that while also not actively participating in it, because to do so when you know where we're going is immoral. It's just the truth. And you can either deal with that in your own way or not. But anyway, what Witkoff says right here goes right in line with what Putin just said right there.
I think the largest issue in that conflict are these so-called four regions: Donbass, Crimea, the names Lugansk, and there's two others.
I want you to keep in mind, I'm not trying to shit all over Witkoff. Kind of am a little bit. I'm just using this to illustrate a point that Steve Witkoff is not fucking negotiating deals with Russia. Okay? He's not. He's deploying narratives that he's being told to deploy. He doesn't know the names of the territories that are going to be annexed by the Russian Federation, that are already de facto part of the Russian Federation. But otherwise, what he's saying here, I think, is apt.
They're Russian speaking.
Yep.
There have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of the people have indicated that they want to be under Russian rule.
Yes.
I think that's the key issue in the conflict. So that's the first thing. That when that gets settled, and we're having very, very positive conversations.
And Russia controls that. In fact, some of those territories are now, from the Russian perspective, part of Russia.
Correct. That's correct. But this has always been the issue,
right?
And it's sort of no one wants to talk about it. That's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is there are constitutional issues within Ukraine as to what they can concede to with regard to giving up territory. The Russians are de facto in control of these territories.
Yes.
The question is, will they be? Will the world acknowledge that those are Russian territories? Will it end up? Can Zelensky survive politically if he acknowledges this?
So again, I agree with everything he's saying there. We're just at the beginnings of that, it seems. I've been saying this. You guys know that I've been saying this for years and years. I'm not the only one. But I was one of the first ones saying the deal that we are eventually going to see signed on the world stage is going to be presented to us as a series of concessions by either side. And Donald Trump is going to get to say that he got Russia to the table and he got Russia to make concessions. And because of him and because of the United States like reemerging on the world stage, the Russians are not going to go past the Dnieper River. They're not going to go into Kyiv. They're not going to go into Moldova and Poland, etc. When, if you've been paying attention to just straight up the narrative deployments out of Russia the entire time, doesn't take a genius to do this. It doesn't mean you have to be 5D chess info warrior to just listen to the stuff Putin says and go, hey, I wonder if he's just going to do that. And he said he wants the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, etc. He wants denuclearization over there. He wants the Donbass to be annexed into the Russian Federation. He already has Crimea. That's exactly what's going to happen. So every single bullet point, and he's going to mandate that Ukraine not be part of NATO. Donald Trump, if you've been paying attention to the big Oval Office row with Zelensky, is already publicly acknowledging that Ukraine is going to have to cede territory to Russia, i.e., the territory that Steve Witkoff informs us Russia already de facto controls. And it's a non-starter out of Trump's own mouth. It's a non-starter of NATO membership. The two things that Russia put forward as the prerequisites, I'll say three. There are three mission statements for the special military operation in Ukraine. One, denazification of Ukraine. I think on a kinetic level, whatever's been happening over there, if anything's been happening over there that we can confirm, it's a denazification effort. The Azov battalion has been decimated. If you don't believe that, just look into any public Ukrainian politician or oligarch who supported them. They are not doing well these days. On that point, the denazification also includes said oligarchs. Ihor Kolomoisky put the money behind Volodymyr Zelensky's path to notoriety in Ukraine on The Hero of the People, I believe it translates to, the television series that he starred in before he was psyoped into the presidency. Zelensky has run an anti-corruption campaign in Ukraine that has resulted in the guy who installed him into power sitting in prison right now. Again, if you think Zelensky's in control of any of this, you just have not been paying attention to what's been going on. So denazification seems like we're well underway. Second, Ukraine can never join NATO. Trump is in full agreement with that. And you've even got NATO on board. Jens Stoltenberg, I think, recently said that that's a non-starter. They're not looking for that. Mark Rutte was recently in the White House saying that that's not going to happen. So they're acknowledging that. And third, as I said, there are going to be territorial concessions to Russia. So 1, 2, 3, the 3 things Putin wanted are the 3 things he's going to get. I just think it's going to be presented to us as some sort of negotiation. And thank God Steve Witkoff's over there telling Putin the 3 things that Putin already told everybody in 2022. And I think that once you understand that, it's not to get annoyed at these guys. I think that they're playing out a story, right? Like the American, I can believe in that while not having to play along with the story, right? Like Chris always says this, and John says this a lot. You don't have to stay still. You don't have to stay still and just cheer on the central narrative. You can understand the central narrative. You can engage with the central narrative. You can project it. You might be right. You might be wrong. But the point here is to try to front run the central narrative so that you're not being guided along with it. So that you're not sitting there on pins and needles wondering if the deal's going to get done. Is Russia going to agree to Steve Witkoff's decrees? Steve Witkoff's decrees are Vladimir Putin's decrees going into his mouth and out his mouth back to Vladimir Putin, because this is kayfabe. This is all a bunch of kabuki theater. It's being done for a reason. But again, you don't have to play along with it. You get to go forward. And I think when you do, some of the stuff we discussed tonight is very signal-based and very encouraging. Since Ash was in the chat, I don't think she gets triggered over this. I think we've psychotically opt her. She's still like, she does that kind of like woman thing where she's not going to fully admit that she's been successfully opt by men, but she has been. But you can, speaking of coordination on some other asymmetric deployments, we've got some financial stuff here. Let's listen to what Vladimir Putin talks about when it comes to the US dollar and the Western banking system.
The share of the US in the world economy is reducing, and it means that the influence of dollar on world economic processes is also reducing. That is why, quite naturally, we see processes with the use of other instruments. For instance, Bitcoin. Who can prohibit the use of it? No one. Or the use of other electronic ways of settlements. No one can ban the use of them because these are new technologies. Anything can happen with dollar. These instruments will continue developing because everyone will try to reduce costs and to make these instruments more reliable. This is inevitable. And dollar has nothing to do with it. But if we see that the use of dollar is reduced, if they do it themselves, they will undermine the basis of their own economic dominance.
So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, you've got the nobody can stop Bitcoin and, cue the G-money. But besides that, I've forwarded, even in this community, the somewhat unpopular theory that one of the benefits of the COVID era was the mutual decoupling of the American and Chinese economies. Man, I wish I had pulled up the video clip. I'll see if I can find it while not losing my train of thought. But Scott Bessent on February 5th sat down with Fox News and basically said what I've been saying for several years now. He said, paraphrasing, one of the only good things that came out of lockdowns was this decoupling with the Chinese economy and the sort of disclosure that we've been way too dependent on them. It was it was a good thing in terms of sovereignty, US onshoring, a lot of the stuff that Trump forwards. I think that we're actually seeing something similar go on with Russia. So in this audience, we've talked a lot about sanctions on Russia and how much they've backfired, right? Putin's talking a big game there, and I think he's right, where he's talking about Bitcoin, etc. But why is he talking about Bitcoin? He's talking about getting away from Western hegemony. He's talking about getting away from the dollar, the petrodollar, i.e., he's talking about getting away from the Federal Reserve, the ECB, and central banks. And Donald Trump, I think, going back to the Power Hour on Wednesday, is talking about the same thing. Now, it's hard sometimes to see that Trump is talking about the same thing because he's talking about making the US dollar stronger. But he's doing that by going to war with the Federal Reserve and putting moves in place such as strategic reserves, etc., and stable coins that I think are going to start undermining the Federal Reserve note and bringing back the idea of a United States dollar. Now, you can think that that's Bitcoin, you can think it's gold, you can think it's oil, you can think it's all the above. It's probably going to be all the above. But really interesting that, if you get away from Putin saying dollar bad, Trump saying dollar good, they're kind of saying the same stuff. Oh, look at this guy. Tax D's nuts. I believe this is a political commentator. G Money Pepe. I don't know the guy, but let's hear what Trump had to say a couple days ago.
I've also called on Congress to pass landmark legislation creating simple, common sense rules for stablecoins and market structure. With the right legal framework, institutions large and small will be liberated to invest, innovate, and take part in one of the most exciting technological revolutions in modern history. It's so big, it's, I think, as big as you can get. Pioneers like you will be able to improve our banking and payment system and promote greater privacy, safety, security, and wealth for American consumers and businesses alike. You will unleash an explosion of economic growth, and with the dollar-backed stablecoins, you'll help expand the dominance of the U.S. dollar, and many, many years to come, it'll be at the top, and that's where we want to keep it. We only want to keep it at the top, always. I can already see that the energy and passion of the crypto community is the kind of spirit that built our country, and it is exciting to watch as you invent the future of finance. And right here, it's going to be right here in the USA, the good old USA. Together, we will make America the undisputed Bitcoin superpower and the crypto capital of the world. Thank you. Good luck. God bless America.
So, lots there. Bitcoin superpower of the world. Definitely a guy that doesn't care about Bitcoin and crypto, and he's into crypto, etc. But what I think is interesting is what he's talking about with the US dollar. He's saying, we're going to make the US dollar dominant. That's coming on the heels of Putin saying we're trying to get away from US dollar dominance. So how can I reconcile those two things? I think that Donald Trump is talking about taking the US dollar away from the Federal Reserve and the central banks. He's talking about stable coins. I've just started going deep down the stablecoin rabbit hole. If you watch any interviews recently with Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, I think those are the two guys. I get it with all the Cash and Kennedy and there's Pam Bondi. There's a lot of big narratives out there right now, right? But a lot of us believe that that's kind of like slow rolling and, we're going to get stuff or we're not going to get stuff. I genuinely believe if you understand how long this war's been going on, then as cliche as it is in the truth community, you understand that it started and ends with the central banks. That's what this is about. So I've been looking for deployments about the central banks. Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick are the two signals right now in the Trump administration. Bessent is very careful with how he communicates. Lutnick is not very careful with how he communicates. And if you want to start getting a peek behind the curtain of what Trump's doing, Howard Lutnick interviews, start looking at some stuff from the last couple of months, and he's giving you a peek behind the curtain. When they're talking about stablecoins, they're talking about private companies buying U.S. treasuries and assets, backing their U.S.-tied stablecoins with those assets, by extension strengthening the U.S. dollar. Now, what is all of that not? It's not the Federal Reserve note. It's not dependent on interest rates. It's not dependent on printing money. It's actually the exact opposite. If all these companies are investing in the strength of the US dollar by pegging stable cryptocurrencies on rails, on financial rails to it, then and I think you don't need an issuer. You don't need central bank issuers. You're going to have stable coins that are frictionless. You no longer need central banking institutions to transact, not just nationally, but particularly internationally. International settlement can occur, or transactions can occur on the stablecoin layer. All these countries can have their own stablecoins, such as Russia and China and the United States. What will be the final mode of settlement? What will be the assets backing these things? I think Bitcoin's going to be one of the major things. Doesn't mean it's going to be the only thing. Probably oil, probably energy, probably gold, silver, etc. But I think all of this is a war against the central banks. And I was very tickled by this the other night after I put out a giant thread that nobody probably read about this game of economic chicken between Trump and the Federal Reserve. I said that look for Trump very soon to start challenging the Federal Reserve in public and telling them to cut interest rates. What he's trying to do is he's trying to provoke them into quantitative easing, which is going to destroy what's left of the fiat petrodollar, while also, ironically, inflating the asset valuations of the American people and allowing us to accelerate this transition off of the Federal Reserve note. That's how I see it. Trump then comes in and says the Fed will be much better off cutting rates as U.S. tariffs start to ease their way into the economy, do the right thing. April 2nd is Liberation Day in America. So I don't know. I mean, there's many readings of Liberation Day, etc. I think a lot of this stuff has to do with the banks and the money. He who makes the money makes the world. I think we all know that. Man, I had a couple other things I could get to, but let's just hit a couple quick China things. We brought up China a little bit tonight, just to kind of round into form on the whole concept of the sovereign alliance. Specifically China, we don't talk about as much. I saved this from a few years ago. I wrote extensively about it at the time. But the media has figured out that they got Xi Jinping wrong. And they told you this in 2022 when he was inaugurated again. 10 years ago, we got Xi Jinping wrong on his coronation. We should reflect on why. This whole article is an apology by the fact that they believed that Xi was going to continue the globalist oligarchic policies, Western oligarch-friendly policies of the Hu Jintao administration, and he did not do that. In my Doomed Dynasty feature, I talked about that. And, here's the panic pattern. The world faces tension with China under Xi Jinping's third term. China's business elite see the country that let them thrive slipping away. So for all the talk of Xi being friendly to oligarchs, not really the way it looks. And here's what we mentioned tonight. Soros called China's Xi Jinping the greatest threat that open societies face today. George Soros warns civilization may not survive Putin's war. Soros confident Trump will be transitory phenomenon. So, again, if you're looking for a microcosm of the signal of the sovereign alliance, there it is. There's a reason I call Xi, Trump, and Putin the trinity of the sovereign alliance. Obviously, the Q drops reference this as well, which started many people down the rabbit hole, including myself. So, if you guys want to read more about that, burningbright.substack.com. Read this giant article called Doomed Dynasty, and maybe you'll figure out a little bit more about China. Here's something from 2023, a little meeting between Xi and Putin. Listen to what is said here. So, for anybody listening, this is Xi Jinping meeting with Vladimir Putin, a joint summit, and they've got a translator here. Right now, there are changes like we haven't seen for 100 years. And we are the ones driving these changes together. Putin says, I agree. Please take care. Please take care, dear friend. You know, again, maybe it's just random diplomacy, but I would suggest that they are saying more than they're letting on when they say that, yeah, we're seeing changes we haven't seen in 100 years. That would take us back to, I don't know, the murder of the Tsars in the early 1900s. That's where, you know, to me, that's one of the major inflection points of this whole war we've been watching. Before I get out of here, I will get to some boosts and some rants. Thank you guys for watching. I'm not used to doing solo stuff, so I don't know if it sucks or not, but hit a thumbs up button, whether it sucks or not. That's what I always say. Can live by those words. We got a boost from last week. J-Dub sent $10 over. Fascinating discussion on March 16th. Show. Totally love how changing your hosts each week keeps it fresh. Monarch versus democracy, worth a revisit. Yep, monarchy versus democracy. Thank you. Yeah, glad people like the different hosts. And I'll keep it going. You know, we'll do repeats, but keep this going. I really like engaging with different minds because it just lets us, it's like a different combination every time. Put the same filters on and you're going to get a lot of the same rhetoric, but when you mix it up, you get some new stuff. Badlands rants, $25 from Tom Terrific. Another week and Trump keeps marching forward for the cause. Thank you, Tom. Melindy, BB seen recently in Belgrade, Serbia. Kind of interesting. Sent me a tweet. Yeah, I have not looked too much into the Serbia stuff. I know there's mass protests, etc. I always am a little careful with those because whenever the media is telling you that there's giant protests, oftentimes it's the other guys. So you got to be careful with that. I'm not sure which side of things that falls on, but color revolutions are usually not good. And usually they start with massive amplified protests. Saw this, $50. I deeply appreciate both of you sharing your research and knowledge with us. I've learned so much these 2 episodes. Definitely shows I'll return to. Thank you. Thank you very much. Want some evergreen shows. Emerald Dragon, hey BB and Matt, another awesome episode of The Narrative. Love listening to Matt's insane depths of knowledge and BB's POV. So glad I'll meet you both at GART. Yeah, GART Plymouth, guys. Badlandsmedia.tv/events. Comes up in, 5 weeks. Nuts. So be seeing a lot of you guys there. Hope to see as many of you as possible. Emerald Dragon sends another one, says, also, BB, my wife and I are convinced you're the Night King from Game of Thrones because of your eyes. Oh, no. Well, you caught me. Winter is coming. I would be a way better Night King than that travesty. I'd say like every month now, I think of how great Game of Thrones was and how legendarily awful the last season was. One of the great betrayals of modern storytelling on every level. So, yeah. RF Ratter, if you could send me an email, I'd like to do something in Plymouth. Love the show. I'm the Badlands tattoo guy. Thanks, man. Go to the website, go to the events page, and there's an events email there. I will warn everybody that if you send really annoying emails, those go to Mrs. Bright. I hear about it all, and then I don't like you. So there's like a transference effect that happens here because I have to listen to her. So if you send her emails, make sure you're very clear about what you're saying and why. And if it's stupid, she's probably just not going to answer you. Like if it's like, how do I get tickets when you're on the ticket page? She's probably not going to answer you. But, you know, hey, send an email over. Otherwise, thanks for the rant. The Anti-Karen, really great show. Again, always enjoy Matt and BB together. Can't wait till you get Cynthia in here, BB. Matt's other half, for those unaware. Yeah, I was not aware, but maybe at some point. I've never seen her on a show. Do they do a show together? That's interesting. Snack Cakes, I'm listening to. God bless. Thank you. $10. J-Back, $10. Much love to the Bright family. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Snack Cakes, send another one. Great job as always. And Lufrano, do these stablecoins counter the 14 magic money computers in lassoing the money being secretly generated? I'm early in the stablecoin rabbit hole. Ash, I've not seen the House of David at some point. I'm just starting to formulate this idea, but a stablecoin is a cryptocurrency that is just de facto pegged to the value of a currency. Now, why can you not? What's to stop a company from just printing stablecoins, right? Like, hey, I'm Tether. Tether's the most famous company, backed by Howard Lutnick, by the way, that issues USDT, US denominated Tether stablecoins. Why can't they just print stablecoins? Because according to regulations, and these are going to increase under the Trump administration, most likely the stablecoin regulation that Trump is talking about is such that in order to issue a stablecoin pegged to the value of the US dollar, you as said issuer have to have on your balance sheet assets equal to the value of the currency that you are printing. Sort of sounds like the origins of banks, right? Like the original national bank, the idea was that they've got gold that they are backing their dollars with. Then at some point it became assets, and then it became the treasury's balance sheet, et cetera, right? But the idea is that assets are the dollars that are in circulation are directly pegged to a basket of assets that the government controls. Obviously, that's not a thing anymore. The Fed's balance sheet is not tied to assets anymore. It's totally divorced from those assets. The irony is, a company like Tether, when they are issuing US denominated stablecoins, is undergoing stricter regulation on its dollars than the Federal Reserve that is printing the dollars. So in my opinion, we are going to see, eventually we're going to transition, I think, into a system where stable coins are the de facto currencies, and these are not central bank digital currencies. They're the antithesis. They're the counter weapon to CBDCs, which Trump said. So keep in mind, guys, Trump's the one who told you, never sell your Bitcoin, number one. Number two, there will never be a US central bank digital currency, which the European Union is moving full speed ahead into. He's also telling you he's going to move forward with US stablecoins. Stablecoins are the antithesis of central bank digital currencies because stablecoins are auditable, and are pegged to an asset valuation. And furthermore, there's going to be many companies issuing stablecoins, all of whom are going to be playing by the same rules. So any of them that are offering whatever they're offering, if they're offering banking services, etc., they're going to be competing with each other in a free market of banks, which was the original idea of banks. They're not going to be able to issue their own currencies unless that currency is pegged to the dollar and unless that value is pegged to an asset balance sheet, which many of them are probably going to back it with Bitcoin, but also other assets. So it's a long way of answering that. But yes, when Elon Musk is talking about magic money printers or magic money computers, that's not what you can do at Tether. That's not what you can do with a US stablecoin or any stablecoin. You cannot just make them. It's all legally tied into the assets you have on your balance sheet. So it seems to me like Trump is privatizing the US dollar and putting it into the free market. And yeah, I mean, which stable coins are going to win? I would guess the ones with the cleanest and the strongest balance sheets that will allow them to have the liquidity to issue more equity, more currency in circulation, etc., but tied to real value. Then the anti-Karen said, Matt's wife and partner is Cynthia Chung. She's a great scholar on many topics, written some great books. Check her out on Rumble under Matt Ehret. Will do. Thank you. Yeah. Interesting stuff. All right, guys. Do I have anything else? I think that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. Please hit the thumbs up button. Really appreciate when you guys do that. I will shill something I wrote this weekend. Bit of a departure. It's not, 5D chess type of InfoWar analysis stuff. It's called The Way, Resetting the Self on the Rocky Road to Awakening. This is a more esoteric piece, and it is all about developing a mindset in the mind war, in the info war. What are we really doing? What's the point of all of this? I was just kind of inspired to write this because I think we can sense that there's a lot of great things happening in the info war, but there's also some frustration where, we're getting people talking about, hey, you're supposed to cheerlead things constantly. You're not supposed to question things. You're interfering with the winning vibes. And, it really made me reevaluate, like, why did I get into the info war? Why did any of you get into the info war? Was it to be on a team? And I love a lot of people that comment on this stuff. My most popular article I ever wrote was all about the Q drops. I strongly believe that they were great. I still believe there's a lot of value in talking about the Q drops, etc. It's not just the Q stuff. It's there's a lot of just rhetoric coming out of the alt media in particular, telling us, what we can and can't criticize and what we can and can't talk about. And it just inspired that article. Check it out if you want. Everything I write over there is free, burningbright.substack.com. Called The Way. Share it if you like it. And otherwise, I think it's worth reflecting on why you got into this stuff, what animates you, and what are you looking for out of this? Are you looking to we can cheer patriots on, we can believe that they have our best interests at heart, while also, self-actualizing and remembering your own sovereignty. One of the things I write in there is, are patriots giving power back to the people, or are they telling us to remember that it never left, right? Now, whatever you're deploying in the info war or engaging with, I think you should keep that in mind. Is the messaging that you're listening to in service of your self-actualization and of sovereignty? Or is it telling you how you're supposed to think, or what you're supposed to espouse, who you're supposed to support, and who you're supposed to retweet, right? There can be a little bit of both. I see in the chat. Patriot, we need it. John calls it the devolution sandwich. Q drops are a huge part of that. Absolutely believe there's real operations going on, just like I say with the Sovereign Alliance. But we are a huge part of it. And the reason I like Stormy and Abs, the reason The Storm is so popular, and all you guys, most of you guys I'm sure watch it, is because I think that they keep that messaging intact of the actualization, the activation of the nodes that the drops, I think, were meant to awaken and energize. I think they get that. I don't think everybody does. And I'm surprised in 2025 that there are some who seem to be regressing with some of that stuff. So I think things are going great, but I think it's worth recentering yourself and recentering what you're doing. What's your end goal? Is it dependent on what is or isn't being dripped out on a patriot narrative timeline? I think the more you divorce yourself from needing to align with that narrative timeline, the more free you're going to become to ideate and to actualize yourself in the Golden Age. The Golden Age isn't being given to us. The Golden Age is us. We get to build it. We get to decide what it is. They're not showing it to us. They're paving the way so we can build it. So stop waiting for people to show you the Golden Age. Start making the Golden Age. Start being the Golden Age. That's my TED Talk. A Justice Cooper sent in a rant at The Wire. Is it reasonable to think if the media tells us about protests in a foreign country that it's paid for and produced by our government? It is. It is reasonable. That's my point on Serbia. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hit the thumbs up button. Share the show on Monday. Otherwise, I will see you next Sunday night. Don't know who my guest is going to be, but I'm going to figure it out. And we're going to talk about narratives and stuff. I think the movie for Tuesday night is a Chris selection, and that is Limitless. Start watching Story Hour on Tuesday nights. You're going to learn everything there is to know about good and bad story structure, and more importantly, narrative intent. They're also just much better written stories than what we're watching in the InfoWar. So, hope you guys enjoy it. As always, I will outro with the intro. Remember, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly.
were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Merlin?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You will bring me. Capture armor. I do not know what strength is in my net. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.